Johnny Carson told everyone which 9 guests from the Golden Age are actually bad guys. For 30 years, Johnny Carson was the host of The Tonight Show, which brought the biggest stars in America into people's living rooms all over the country. People who saw him laughed and smiled, felt like they were watching old friends catch up over coffee. But that smile often went away when the cameras quit rolling and everyone went home. People who worked closely with Carson say that he had a mental list of guests that he thought were truly awful people. A producer who worked with Johnny for more than 10 years said that he was always professional on TV. During ad breaks, though, he would sometimes whisper to Ed that the person on stage should never be near a child or a camera. In his later years, Carson was more open about the famous people he had quietly disliked during his career. The stories he told his close friends about famous people made them seem like dark characters who were nothing like the people loved. One shocking story was about a famous actress who seemed nice and gentle on his couch but had screamed at a young production helper so badly backstage that security had to step in. Carson was caught doing something so disturbing in his dressing room that he almost called the cops, according to another story. Carson didn't just see these people as hard to work with or demanding. He said they were really bad people who were predators, abusers, and manipulators who were protected by the entertainment business for decades while the public only saw their perfect, glamorous public images. First, we need to know why Johnny Carson really didn't like the first name on his secret list, as well as the story of the private fight behind the scenes that no one has ever heard before. Johnny Carson could never stand the charming mean guy Frank Sinatra. On screen, they seemed to have natural chemistry. Carson smiled, laughed, and played the gracious host whenever Sinatra went on The Tonight Show. The famous crooner told jokes, stories, and sometimes broke into song. People watching at home thought they looked like old friends hanging out. Off-camera, though, things were much less friendly. People who knew Carson well say that he hated Sinatra a lot, not because of how talented he was, which Carson fully admired, but because of how the old blue eyes treated other people when he wasn't in the spotlight. Carson once told a friend that if he wasn't singing, he'd be a mob enforcer, which was later confirmed by several books. I think he was both sometimes. People who worked on the show knew that Sinatra's trips were a source of stress. Staff members remembered that he never came by himself. He was always with a group of 6 to 8 guys. One person on stage remembered that they weren't theater guys. These guys are more like the ones you'd want to avoid in a dark alley. The staff felt uncomfortable because these men would spread out around the studio and watch them work. One cameraman said it felt like they were being watched. What really bothered Carson, though, was how Sinatra treated people he thought were less important than him. While Sinatra was being taped in the early 1970s, a floor manager made the common mistake of giving him the usual 3-minute warning before his part. Several witnesses say Sinatra grabbed the man by the tie, pulled him close and growled, "Nobody tells me when I've got 3 minutes, I'll go on when I'm ready." The floor manager, a Korean War veteran in his 50s, watched the whole thing on a studio monitor from his office and looked visibly shaken. Carson is said to have turned pale and almost canceled Sinatra's section right then and there. From then on, Johnny Carson's polite smile on TV whenever Frank Sinatra came on wasn't one of respect. It was all business, but there was a quiet disgust behind it that never went away. The producers had to tell Carson that Sinatra would bring in more viewers in order to get him to agree to do the show. But that wasn't the end of the men's bad mood. Sinatra's unpredictability was another thing that always made people angry. He was known for stopping last-minute shows all the time. At times, even after getting to the office. One time he allegedly decided he wasn't in the mood 2 hours before the taping and just left. During a commercial break, they said the most honest thing about how bad their relationship was. Sinatra said something rude about the way a female employee looked, and it was loud enough for everyone close to hear. Carson broke his normal straight-faced professionalism when he looked at him and said, "We don't talk about my staff that way here." The studio fell silent. Sinatra was shocked that anyone, even Johnny Carson, would be brave enough to attack him. He just sat there mute. When the cameras turned back on, both men smiled like they do on TV, but everyone behind the scenes could feel the chill. Carson's tone grew more distant and his questions got shorter. After the show was over, he reportedly told his producer, "I don't care how good his ratings are, limit him to no more than once a year." This was a strong statement for Carson, who didn't usually get involved in booking choices. He almost never turned people away. Sinatra's rudeness and violence, on the other hand, had gone too far for Johnny to ignore. The next person on Carson's mental blacklist, whose name was not Frank Sinatra, represented the bullying side of celebrity power. This person's big ego refused to recognize limits. Janet Leigh, the Queen of Hollywood, had ice in her blood. People saw the beautiful figure they had loved for decades when Crawford went on The Tonight Show in 1970. She was the very picture of old Hollywood beauty, with her perfect posture, impeccable style, and well-practiced charm. According to several members of The Tonight Show staff, the woman behind the camera bore little resemblance to the persona viewers saw on screen. Years later, Carson allegedly told his biographer, "She was one of the coldest people I have ever interviewed. Speaking with her was like addressing a beautiful statue, nothing within." The difficulties reportedly began even before Joan Crawford arrived at the studio. Her team had delivered an extensive 4-page list of lighting and staging requirements so detailed that the show's technical director kept a copy for decades. Everything had to be exact, a former producer recalled, from the precise angle of her chair to the height of Carson's desk down to the studio temperature, exactly 67 degrees, not 66 or 68. When Crawford finally arrived 3 hours before taping, she brought her own makeup team despite the show's award-winning artists. Yet what most clearly revealed her character, staff members said, was the way she differentiated people based on their status. She practically curtsied to Johnny, a stagehand remembered. But when a young production assistant inadvertently entered her dressing room with a glass of water Crawford had requested, Crawford allegedly erupted. Witnesses said that moment demonstrated why her name topped Carson's private list of difficult guests, a woman immaculate in appearance yet harboring a chilling severity beneath the surface. According to multiple witnesses, Crawford launched into a tirade so vicious that everyone in the hallway froze. She allegedly berated the 20-year-old assistant, new to her career, calling her a brainless little fool and suggesting she try working in a brothel where incompetence might actually be useful. The young woman ran out in tears while Crawford demanded she be fired. Carson's producer refused, creating a tension that persisted throughout the taping. However, the most unsettling aspect of Crawford's appearance was not merely her treatment of staff, but the precise, almost mechanical transformation she underwent once the cameras rolled. She was like a machine pretending to be a woman, one producer recalled. Every response, laugh, and supposedly spontaneous moment seemed rehearsed to perfection, leaving nothing that felt genuine. During commercial breaks, she would instantly drop her smile, sit silently with a blank expression, and speak to no one, only to revive the facade the moment the red light returned. Even Carson, renowned for putting anxious guests at ease, could not establish any authentic connection with her. After the show, he reportedly turned to Ed McMahon and remarked, "I've interviewed corpses with more personality." Years later, when Christina Crawford's memoir Mommy Dearest detailed Joan Crawford's alleged abuse of her adopted children, Carson was reportedly unsurprised. Close friends said he simply nodded and commented, "I saw who she truly was in those few hours. I believe everything." But if Carson was uneasy about Joan Crawford's cold control, the next name on his list meant something even worse: raw power that is used to scare and threaten. Orson Welles was a genius who didn't believe in following the rules. During Carson's time, Welles went on The Tonight Show more than once, where his big voice, big presence, and interesting stories from his famous career wowed the audience. People saw a beautiful rancuneur. What Carson and his team saw was different. A man who seemed to be so caught up in his own fantasy that he thought the normal rules of TV no longer applied to him. Carson is said to have said never again after a particularly hard taping. That person still believes he is in charge of Rome. A lot of the time the problems began before Welles even walked into the office. Several writers for The Tonight Show say that he consistently turned down every question or topic that the team had come up with. "He told us that our questions were simple and clear. He literally crossed them all out and handed back a blank page," a former writer remembered. This put Carson in the awkward position of having to interview one of the biggest names in movie history without any structure or direction. This was almost difficult to do because Welles would often start long, winding monologues that were hard to cut down to time. Welles was set to have a 7-minute section on one of his appearances in the mid-1970s. What happened next showed that even Johnny Carson could only take so much. During one very hectic taping, Orson Welles stayed on Carson's couch for almost 25 minutes, which was much longer than the 7 minutes he was supposed to stay. He didn't pay any attention to any of Johnny's minor signs that it was time to end. A director later said that Johnny had a whole plan. He would thump his pencil, move around in his seat and look at the producer as clear signs that the break was over. Wells saw all of them and didn't say anything. Because of this, 2 people who were supposed to be on that night never showed up. Wells was just as bad when he wasn't on camera. Staff members remembered that he wouldn't talk to the production helpers directly. Instead, you talked about them like they weren't there. He would say things like, "Tell the girl, I need more water," and ask the boy to fix the light, even though they were both standing right next to him. People who knew Carson well say that Wells's tendency to run The Tonight Show like it was his own show made him the angstiest. He would show up with props out of the blue, change the subject, and even try to direct the cameraman from his seat. He got up and started telling our camera operators what angles to use one time. A former producer remembers how angry Johnny was. When Wells didn't follow the rules, Carson was especially annoyed because he was known for being precise and respectful of television craft. He turned to Ed McMahon after that appearance and said, "Genius doesn't excuse everything. Being brilliant doesn't give you the right to hijack someone else's show." In public, he kept saying that Wells was one of the most important people in film history. But behind closed doors, he started to see him as a warning, as proof that ego can make even the best ability look bad. But if Orson Welles was a good example of how hard it can be to control a big personality, Carson's next guest was tough for a different reason. Unpredictability. Bette Davis was the queen of verbal fights in Hollywood. When Bette Davis went on The Tonight Show, people saw the sharp, magnetic celebrity they loved. She was poised, funny, and full of stories from her many years in movies. But people who watched never saw what happened before or after the cameras rolled. There were times when Davis's short anger and sharp tongue made the studio feel very cold. "She doesn't need a stage," Carson is said to have told Ed McMahon after the show. "She needs a courtroom. No one should have to be cross-examined by Bette Davis without a lawyer present." Several staff members of The Tonight Show say that her first mistake was how she treated other guests. What came next showed that Bette Davis wasn't just a diva. She spoke with a lot of power. Not even Johnny Carson could keep it together. When Bette Davis was on shows with other famous people, chaos often followed. She often cut people off in the middle of a sentence, especially younger artists or female guests, and she would turn her back on them on the couch sometimes. A former talent coordinator said, "If someone else got a big laugh, you could almost see her fuming, already planning how to take the spotlight back." Davis was even harder to control when she wasn't on camera. Before going on stage, she was known to ask for whiskey in her dressing room. It was common for people her age to drink, but she often said rude things when she was drunk. Later, several women who worked on The Tonight Show in the 1970s said that Davis sometimes used sexist and racist language that was so harsh that it shocked people even back then. One makeup artist remembered offering her skills and being turned down with a rude comment. "Find someone whose hands don't look like they were drunk for 3 days." Carson usually tried to stay out of direct disagreement with guests, but he had to step in when Davis started yelling at a card operator for being too slow during practice. A stage assistant who saw it said that Johnny did step in and help. His words were quiet but firm. "Miss Davis, on this show we treat everyone with respect or we don't speak at all." Davis stopped moving, obviously not used to being questioned. After that, they quietly gave up. Davis wasn't just Davis's attitude that made things hard for Carson. It was the difference between how smart she was and how she behaved. Carson had a lot of respect for her work because she was without a doubt one of Hollywood's best actors. He is said to have told his producer, "That's it. Life's too short to be verbally flogged by Bette Davis, no matter how many Oscars she has." If Davis's sharp tongue was aimed at adults who could defend themselves, Carson's next troublesome guest went even further into dark territory. The way you treated young women was inappropriate for work. Mickey Rooney, the old kid star whose hands were always moving. From 1939 to 1941, Rooney was the world's biggest movie star. He was truly a royal star in Hollywood and a live link to the golden age of the industry. His performances on The Tonight Show should have been nostalgic celebrations of a great career. They became well known among the crew for all the wrong reasons instead. Erratic energy, getting drunk sometimes, and acting in a very bad way. He feels like being perverted is okay because he is short. Carson is said to have told his director after a bad show in the mid-1970s. In his mid-50s at the time, Rooney had a reputation among female staff members for touching them without permission, making crude jokes and not caring about professional limits at all. Even Johnny Carson found his behavior disgusting. Many people who worked on the show say that when younger production helpers heard that Mickey Rooney was going to be there, they often asked to be moved to another job. You had to hold his hand when you brought him water. He would then get too close and ask if you were married. One former helper talked about working there in the late 1970s. He would hold on to your wrist just long enough to make you feel bad if you tried to leave. It was also strange that Rooney didn't seem to be able to or would admit when he had had too much to drink. Employees of The Tonight Show said he looked obviously drunk at least 3 times, slurring his words and losing his train of thought in the middle of a statement. During a famous appearance in 1977, he started telling a story about Judy Garland that quickly became inappropriate, so Carson had to cut him off and quickly change the topic. During the next commercial break, Carson is said to have asked his director, "Is he drunk or is this just who he is now?" Carson had a hard time with Rooney because they were from different generations and had very different ideas about how people should behave. As someone who was born in 1920, Rooney grew up in Hollywood during a time when some behavior towards women was either okay or even expected. Many years of experience as a director said that Johnny wasn't perfect, but he was very efficient. There were lines that Rooney didn't seem to understand. Carson did something very unusual after the show. He apologized to the young actor who was also a guest that night. This was after Rooney made several inappropriate comments about her during a particularly awkward taping. It had never made Johnny look so bad about how a guest behaved. The director recalled, "He told her that is not how professionals conduct themselves on my show, and it will not happen again." And he meant it. From that moment on, Mickey Rooney's appearances became increasingly infrequent. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, Carson reportedly insisted that any segment involving Rooney be recorded during the daytime rather than aired live at night. Yet as uncomfortable as Rooney's behavior could be, Carson's next challenging guest tested his patience in an entirely different way, through a list of demands so excessive they became legendary among Tonight Show staff. Zsa Zsa Gabor, the glamorous diva who nearly pushed Johnny Carson to his limit, was a longtime favorite of audiences. With her striking beauty, pronounced Hungarian accent, and flirtatious wit, she appeared on the show dozens of times during Carson's tenure. Viewers found her irresistible, glamorous, eccentric and humorous, turning jokes about her many marriages and extravagant lifestyle into part of her celebrity appeal. Behind the scenes, however, staff members described a very different person. According to numerous employees, Gabor ranked among the most demanding and difficult guests in the show's history. "I'd rather interview a cat," Carson reportedly quipped after one particularly exhausting appearance. At least a cat wouldn't need 3 assistants and custom lighting. Her list of requirements began long before she entered the studio. Former staff members recalled that her standard dressing room setup included a temperature set precisely to 74 degrees, a vase of fresh orchids, never carnations, a bottle of Perrier with exactly 3 ice cubes, and her personal lighting technician flown in at the show's expense. She also insisted that no female guest under the age of 40 appear on the same episode. Her writer read like a comedy sketch. One former talent coordinator laughed. "The first time we saw it, we thought it had to be a joke. If even a single detail was overlooked, Gabor reportedly refused to leave her dressing room. Tapings were delayed, guests were kept waiting, and the crew scrambled to satisfy her requirements." One infamous incident became the stuff of legend. Gabor arrived for a taping only to discover that the makeup department did not have her preferred brand of foundation. Witnesses said she erupted into a shouting match with the head makeup artist, demanding that someone be sent to Beverly Hills immediately to purchase the correct product. Johnny actually had to intervene, a former producer recalled. He called her directly and said something like, "Zsa, darling, you already look stunning and we have a show to do. Let's save the makeup crisis for another day." What frustrated Carson most was not merely her behavior but the chaos it created for everyone else. Other guests were left waiting, production schedules collapsed, and crew members were forced to work late to recover lost time. After one appearance in which Gabber arrived 40 minutes late and then complained about her introduction, Carson reportedly turned to his executive producer and said, "Next time she wants to come on, tell her we've renamed it The Tonight Show starring Zaza Gabber, and I'll happily play her sidekick." Despite the frustration she caused, Gabber continued to be invited back, proof that when the cameras rolled, even Carson could not deny she was television gold. Yet if her diva-like demands were exhausting, Carson's next troublesome guest brought a different kind of discomfort, one rooted not in vanity but in personal boundaries. Shelley Winters, the unpredictable force Johnny Carson never quite knew how to manage, was a two-time Academy Award winner whose career spanned from glamorous ingenue roles to intense character performances. By all accounts, she should have been an ideal Tonight Show guest, experienced, eloquent and rich in Hollywood history. But behind the scenes, she became known as one of the most volatile and unpredictable guests Carson ever encountered. "Shelley doesn't talk, she detonates," Carson reportedly remarked after one particularly intense interview. According to crew members, Winters struggled or refused to adapt to the show's light-hearted tone. Rather than sharing humorous anecdotes or promotional comments, she often launched into impassioned political speeches or startling personal confessions, leaving Carson scrambling to keep the segment on track. During one appearance in the mid-1970s, a simple question about her latest film devolved into a 5-minute monologue on government corruption and media hypocrisy. "Johnny was a master of conversational control," a former director said. But with Shelley, it was like trying to steer a tornado. Her unpredictability was not limited to her words. Winters had a reputation for sudden physical outbursts. A widely discussed example came from a British talk show appearance in which she threw a glass of whiskey in actor Oliver Reed's face after he made sexist remarks. That story spread quickly through the industry, prompting Tonight Show staff to take extra precautions. "We removed anything breakable from the set before she came on," one stage manager admitted. "If it could be thrown, it disappeared." Despite the tension, many of Carson's colleagues believed Winters' volatility stemmed not from arrogance but from sincerity. She was deeply passionate about her politics, beliefs, and sense of justice, viewing every public appearance as an opportunity to say something meaningful, even if it created discomfort. Carson, although visibly uneasy during her most heated moments, respected that authenticity. After one fiery appearance in which she criticized the Vietnam War, he reportedly turned to his producer and said, "I might not want to spend a weekend with her, but I'll give her this: she believes every word she says." Shelley Winters may have tested Carson's patience, but his next difficult guest pushed him into far more profound discomfort, one rooted not in personality but in ideology. Jane Russell, the Hollywood bombshell whose political views Carson found intolerable, was best known for her sultry presence in films such as The Outlaw and Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. Her glamour, sharp wit, and legendary status made her an obvious choice for The Tonight Show. Yet after only a few appearances in the early 1970s, she virtually disappeared from the show, a move insiders say was no accident. According to former staff, Carson became increasingly unsettled by Russell's outspoken political beliefs, which he felt crossed the line from opinion to intolerance. Although Carson leaned Republican for much of his life, he took great care to keep the show politically neutral and broadly welcoming. "Johnny didn't mind differing viewpoints," one longtime producer explained. "What he couldn't stand was when those views turned into cruelty or prejudice." Several staff members recalled that Russell made harsh and disparaging comments about LGBTQ+ individuals working on the show. During one early 1970s taping, she allegedly refused to let a gay makeup artist handle her touch-ups, insisting someone else be assigned. Even more troubling, according to a talent coordinator, was an incident involving actor Rock Hudson. Russell reportedly refused to appear on the same episode as him, making offensive remarks about his sexuality, which, while not publicly known at the time, was well understood within industry circles. Carson, who counted several gay friends and staff among his close inner circle, was deeply offended. He was ahead of his time in that respect, the coordinator said. He simply would not tolerate discrimination, not in his studio. The final breaking point reportedly came in 1973, during a commercial break, when Russell made dismissive remarks about recent civil rights legislation. Several crew members overheard her comments and immediately informed Carson. Though the remarks were never recorded, they sealed her fate. From that moment forward, Jane Russell was quietly and permanently removed from the booking list. For a host who rarely intervened in guest selections, especially involving someone of Russell's stature, this decision spoke volumes. Johnny Carson had encountered every imaginable type of guest over his 3 decades hosting The Tonight Show, from temperamental icons to self-important stars. But the person he reportedly disliked most was a man whose public charm masked a far darker private reality, Jerry Lewis. To the public, Lewis was a comedic genius and humanitarian, a high-energy performer who entertained generations and raised millions through his annual telethons. Behind the scenes, however, multiple insiders described him as one of the most arrogant and demeaning celebrities ever to appear on the program. "He's what happens when ego outpaces talent," Carson reportedly said after a particularly unpleasant exchange. During one notorious taping, Lewis repeatedly interrupted both Carson and the other guests, dominating the conversation and even reaching across the desk to adjust Carson's tie without permission, a gesture that visibly irritated the normally composed host. His treatment of the staff was even worse. He refused to learn anyone's name, referring to employees only by their job titles, and once erupted at a camera operator for breathing too loudly during rehearsal. What most disgusted Carson was the disparity between Lewis's public image as a champion of children and his private treatment of those who could do nothing for his career. "That two-faced act made Johnny's skin crawl," a producer recalled. After Lewis's final appearance in the early 1980s, Carson reportedly said only, "never again," effectively banning him from the show.